Sweet, so I'm going to be talking about animations today, which is a little bit different for a JavaScript meetup, I guess, but it's what I wanted to talk about because it's what I'm interested in right now. And I'm not talking about animations like old Steamboat Willie here. He is a completely different thing, and he led to many great things, but it's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about animations in like the web apps and the interfaces that you potentially build. I hope some or most of you build websites and interfaces, or you might not get much out of this, but that is the idea. And the idea is that animation is pretty important in the web, and we're in kind of a weird spot right now, because we kind of started out 5-10 years ago with Flash. Flash was kind of the big thing with the web, and everyone built their websites in Flash. And because Flash is an animation tool, everything was animated, so that was kind of the one mountain peak that we've been on. And then people started realizing that Flash is really not a great medium for the web, so they started using actual web technology. And then we kind of went to the other side, and nothing was animated. And I think there needs to be a meetup of those two ideas, and I think we need to use animations in our interfaces to not just be flashy, but actually benefit the user and bring them value. So I want to show you some examples of what I consider to be good and bad animations on the web. First, we've got this, which is a good animation because it conveys meaning. It's got like this little loader here that tells you what it's doing, and it flips over, and it just makes it really obvious that it's doing something and that it's succeeding. And it also just makes it effortless for the user to think about the states that this thing is in. It just makes sense in our heads. It doesn't make you think about anything. Then we've got this other thing, which is like, this is a website I found where you hover over this thing, and the hover animation is just really distracting to me, because it's jerky, and it like flashes the background in like a half a second after the icon color changes, and it's just distracting, and it doesn't serve any value whatsoever. It's just a distraction. It's this I would call a bad animation. Then we've got animations that improve usability, like this one, where these little things, when they're created, they come in and they have just this little bounce animation that makes it really clear that this new thing has come in. And it's subtle, so it calls your attention to it, but it's also easy to ignore if you're not really interested that this thing's happening. From there, here's a bad one. And I'm going to Apple. Are you going to work? Yeah. Okay. So this is annoying. You unlock your phone, and it takes 4 or 5 seconds before you can actually do anything with your phone. And it's kind of a nitpicky detail, but when you use your phone like 30 or 40 times a day, like most people like of my generation do, then it becomes really annoying really fast, and you don't want something slowing your users down. Good animation also can be used aesthetically to create memories, and honestly, this is my favorite part of this whole talk, because they click this button and watch this overlay just sliced in half. And I love that. So cool. It also has a sound effect that sounds like an explosion, which is kind of cool. So, boom. Yeah, so it creates memories. I like it. And then another example of a bad animation comes from Apple again, and when you adjust your volume on an iPhone, it pops up with this semi-translucent volume overlay that's like a quarter of the screen, and it blocks the most important part of the screen, which is right in the middle, and you can't do anything about it. It's there for 4 or 5 seconds before it fades out. And in this game that I happen to be playing at the time, there's another zombie standing behind that that's going to kill me because I don't know it's there. It's just bad, and you shouldn't do that. And I tell you about all of these things because, well, for 2 reasons. One, because animation is challenging. Apple, 2 of those examples of bad animations were straight from Apple, and if anyone has animation right, then it's Apple. So it's obviously difficult if even they can't get it right. And also, I just kind of want to get the bug in your head to start thinking about animations and how they affect your experience when using websites and web apps, and whether it's good or bad. Since this is a JavaScript meetup, I should probably get into some code. So I want to tell you about a neat thing that's coming to JavaScript called the Web Animation API, which is this. And it's the greatest API of all time, or just a really great API. And it's going to make things so much easier for us to animate things on the web, where you can just define a new animation, and then under there you have 2 different states of how you want your element to be, and then you just fill out a couple more details below, and then you can just use this API to swap between the states of things. And it's going to be fantastic and super nice, but it's not there yet. So if you haven't started animating on your web interfaces yet, and you know this is coming, I could see you wanting to be like this cat, who says it's easier to wait for this new API to make things so easy. But I don't think you should do this. I don't think you should be a lazy ginger. That's a bad idea. Because we need to start using animations today. We need to start using them to make our users' experience better. And that's what's going to get us that pile of gold that you saw with Scrooge McDuck when he's sitting on it. And that's what we need to make our interfaces to take them to the next level. And we've got plenty of power in CSS and JavaScript to do this today. It's just a little more difficult, and I'm going to give you a technique that makes this easier in a minute here. You should, instead of being that ginger cat, you should be like this cat. You don't necessarily have the full power of animations behind you yet, but you can put on the mask and you can kind of make it look like you have the full power of animations. You can't necessarily do the things that apps do, but you can get close enough that people can't really do it. And I'm going to tell you about a principle that allows you to do this better and faster, which is called flip. I think you should flip your animations. And flip is an acronym, and it stands for first, last, inverse, and play, which is just a way to think about animations, essentially. And if you're wondering, that background image is actually a Japanese arcade game. That thing under there is a table, and you actually flip that table to play the game. And the point of the game is to destroy the most things that you can with your flipping table, which is pretty spectacular. So back to flip. I'm going to give you an example of how this works. This is a super simple example using CSS, and so essentially what we're doing here is we've got a width on this element, and all we want to do is grow this element by 1.2. So we just want to grow it a little bit on hover, and that's what that does. And then this translate up here essentially tells the browser to animate that transition. And that's all it's doing, and this is a bad example of an animation. This is, I mean, it works technically, but it's not going to give you the most bang for your buck. Essentially because when the computer hovers over the thing, that's when it starts modifying the transform, and the computer hasn't had any time to think about that before, so it just takes a little longer for the computer to actually figure out the variables involved in doing that. So what you actually want to do is go back to the flip principle, and the nice thing about this example is it gives us 2 variables out of flip, which is we have the first state, which is with 500 pixels, then we have the last state, which is just scaled by 1.5 or 1.2. So we've got the first 2 pieces of the puzzle, and we can combine those to make this, which is just slightly different. Instead of having 500 pixels width, we've got 600 pixels here, and we scale it down by 0.83, which means 500 pixels. And then on hover, instead of actually performing those calculations then, we just reset them to the default, so it grows. So this is flip principles. You figure out the first and the last position. You invert them, so the last is actually first, and then you just reset them when you want to play it. And it's as simple as that. And this is a super simple example with CSS. In this particular example, it wouldn't really make that big of a difference unless you have some really crazy things going on inside of your container. So it's not a huge deal, but it's still, it doesn't hurt anything, and it helps make sure that your animations are always going to perform well. So we can go to a slightly more complex example, a JavaScript example, which is, so essentially you've got, this is doing the same thing as the other example I showed you. In that first variable, we grab the position of the container that you have. Then we add a class that actually sets the styles for the last position, and then we grab the last style. Then we invert that by subtracting the last from the first, and apply that on there. Then the request animation frame is kind of just to make sure that the layout has had time to modify itself from our first example. And inside there, we add a class that then applies the transforms. So then it's actually where it starts animating. And then we reset that to play the animation. And it sounds complex when I say it like that. It's not actually that bad once you've read about it a little while. And that's Flip at its best. So I don't really have any more to say about that for now. So let's go to our summary, which is animations are important in your in everything you build. You don't necessarily need animation, but animation generally helps make things smoother. Don't be a lazy ginger. You don't need to wait until the new shiny things come out to actually start using this stuff. You can start using it today using flip principles. And after you do all of these steps is when you can sit on your pile of gold. And that is Scrooge McDuck, who is very unhappy at you for taking all his gold for animations. Yes, sir?
2 quick questions about this. This is opposed to the CSS method. Like, I know CSS, one of the nightmares about it, using the transform, is it requires, like, I think 9 or 10 to work. Yeah. Does this, since this is all JavaScript, does this kind of work back before? Well, where does this start at as far as compatibility? And my second question is, since you were saying about how CSS is not as good because it has to do calculations on the fly. So would this increase page load time because it does all the calculations ahead of time? And puts more. I mean, basically, is it more? Do you want to kind of preload it and then put in the JavaScript, or do you want it to be on the fly and do it in the CSS? Is that kind of more the question?
So the first question is what is our backwards compatibility on this? What browsers does it work in? And this example here does not work in 99 because it's using the same transforms from CSS.
Oh, I see.
You can do the same thing using just other CSS things that do work in IE, like just the top attribute. It's not going to give you as good performance, but it does work. And if you need to support older browsers, then it still benefits you to use flip principles.
Okay.
So you just have to tweak this a little bit to make it support older browsers. Second question. What was your second question?
It was about whether is this kind of like preloading the
Yes.
processing power as opposed to doing it on the fly.
So there are kind of 2 phases to this. When you're working on an interface and you're about to animate something, you have about 100 milliseconds between when the user clicks on something and when they actually perceive the starting of that thing happening.
Okay.
So you have 100 milliseconds to actually do these calculations if you need to. If that time isn't adequate, then you can actually do this where you kind of move the element and grab the differences between the 2 states. You can do that just on page load, and then you store those in variables, and then when the animation actually comes, you just give the browser those values rather than calculating it right there. And that's a great way to speed up your animations. Make sense? Any other questions?
Do you see like will change, the CSS attribute, helping out in the performance though?
And that is actually going to help a lot. And in a way, okay, so the question was, do I see the will change attribute helping with this? Will change is a new thing that's coming to CSS where essentially, if you're going to animate something, you can just say that you're going to animate it. You can tell the browser, this is something that I will be animating. and the browser can then kind of optimize it to prepare for that, I guess. And I don't know exactly what the backend optimizations are that they're going to do with will change. It's going to be something similar to this, and that will help enormously. But at the same time, this would be another optimization on top of that optimization. So this would help you get even smoother animations in addition to will change. And it depends on, it depends on the device you're running your animations on. Obviously, a desktop computer like this is going to be more powerful than most phones are, so it's going to have smoother animations, and this just helps keep us about less powerful devices. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? Good. All right. My name is Timothy Miller. For those of you taking notes, you shouldn't have trouble spelling it. I'm TJ at Design on all of the things, and if you want to see these slides again, they're at forwarddesigner.com/presentation.